Hi, and welcome to My Path Soul Coach, where I offer you insights on everything spirituality and energy healing to help you align with your soul purpose. If you are new here and find this information useful, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe. If you are interested in spiritual life coaching sessions, energy healing, or intuitive readings, I have linked my website in the description box below. So let's get to today's topic, the dark night of the soul. I'm going to go through some signs that you're actually going through a dark night of the soul, and I'm going to give you 5 tips for getting through it. So, what is it? What is the dark night of the soul? A period during your spiritual awakening journey where you feel a strong sense of disconnect. It can feel like you're going through anxiety, depression, loneliness, and it can bring up a feeling of hopelessness. Um, it's a very painful period for many, emotionally, socially, and sometimes even physically, right? It's a period of ego death and detachment from the world and how we thought the world functioned. A lot of what we believed to be true is being shed during this period, which can be very confusing. There is a feeling that even God and your spirit guides have abandoned you, which is ironic because you're going through a spiritual awakening and you somehow feel more detached from your spirituality, more abandoned by your spirituality. But rest assured that this is temporary. There is also more than one dark night of the soul, for most of us, because spiritual awakenings happen in layers, and with each layer of awakening, we will encounter some pain, something that's coming up to be processed. Um, but over time, as we experience more dark nights of the soul, it gets easier because we learn how to manage that void that comes up. We learn how to process our feelings and we develop better strategies for getting through it, especially after that first one, which is usually the biggest one. So, for some of us, a dark night of the soul may begin as a physical or emotional crisis, right? You may encounter some significant life changes or events. So, for me personally, when I had my first child, that was a real moment that kicked off my spiritual awakening, and over time also brought me to that dark night of the soul because I was questioning everything, and I was already someone who questioned things. But suddenly, especially as a divine feminine, right? As we all have feminine and masculine within us, but the feminine is associated with the intuitive um, nature. It's associated with psychic abilities. We all have these things within us. So birthing a child really opens us up to these abilities. Really opens us up and creates the spiritual awakening. And I would say, even in my own experience and most mothers I've spoken to, that with each child that you birth, you go through a new spiritual awakening. You go through a new dark night of the soul. You shed another layer of patterns because each child comes into this world and a new you is born with that birth. There's a rebirth of your soul once again. So this was a period in my time, in my life, where I definitely underwent a dark night of the soul. I was questioning food, toxicity in the products I was using at home, the environment. I had this extreme sense of fear because I wanted to shield my baby from so many things. And I went through this anxiety and isolation even because I was living in a society surrounded by people who didn't question these things. So I felt very alone in that. Another time when I experienced a dark night of the soul, and this is how it does usually connect with your significant life changes, was when I moved to another state with my family. It was just my husband and me and my children. So our extended family stayed in all the way across the country in another state, and we came over by ourselves, and I had to experience the loneliness of not having my mother around like I was used to, not having my sisters around like I was used to. So that was a period of introspect and me having to face myself, because I didn't have the usual, what I would call distractions, right? If you're bored, you call someone. If you're bored, you go to someone's house. Well, when you don't have that, it almost kicks off one of these dark night of the soul crises. And you become angry as well. You become resentful of the people who are so-called asleep, because you're starting to look at the world so differently, and suddenly nothing makes sense. No one understands you, so who do you talk to? So that's one aspect. Those are a few aspects of the dark night of the soul. The stronger our attachments are to these programs, to the conditioning, and the more difficult we will find the dark night of the soul to be. It will be much more difficult to break free from old patterns and ways of thinking when we stay attached to doing things the old ways. So surrender is important here, and understanding that you are not your archetype, right? You are not just a mom. You are not just a teacher. You are not just a wife. Whatever it is that you identify as, you are the essence of your soul. You are so much deeper than that. So can you recognize who you truly are when you are no longer in those roles? The dark night of the soul invites you to come face to face with your soul's true essence and to ask yourself these questions. And one of those moments for me was when I did move to another state and I left behind my job, my career. I mean, I could still go back to it now, obviously, but I decided to be a stay-at-home mom for my children. I thought that was extremely important. That was actually a goal of mine, to raise my own children. And it saddened me to think that I would have to send them to school for 5 days a week and barely see them. So I homeschooled my kids because I wanted to be raising them. I wanted to be a part of their everyday life. I didn't want to have to see them for only 2 or 3 hours a day and then just put them to bed. So when I left that life behind of being a career mom, of working full time and seeing my kids just at night, I did have to question who I really was. Who am I without this career? Who am I when I don't go to work every day? When I don't say, hey, I'm a speech therapist, right? Who am I? So that's why the dark night of the soul is there. It's there to test you, to see, do you understand who you really are when those other things aren't there? Or are you so attached to that identity, to that role that society has prescribed to you, that when that gets removed, you're disoriented? And I can tell you it was no easy task, and I probably am still processing this way of being. But it's fulfilling, and you can get through it, and it only enriches you and who you are. But it can be difficult. So what are some other signs that you are experiencing the dark night of the soul? First and foremost, your family and friends who are closest to you, they will notice right away that something's changed, and you will notice. It's a two-way thing, right? You will notice that your frequency is changing, your vibration is changing. You can't be in the same situations anymore. You're not aligned with the same old things that used to be. This includes, you might feel so out of place at family functions. You might feel out of place at work or with friends. Maybe you just want to talk about spirituality. Maybe you just want to talk about spirit guides. I don't know. And people start looking at you a little funny, and they don't really get it, and you know they don't really get you. And this becomes something that starts to isolate you after a while. You don't feel understood, you feel left out, you feel alone. And for me, part of it was when my mind started changing, when my sense of being started changing. I wanted to move out of the suburbs. I wanted to raise my own food. I wanted to have land. I wanted my kids to grow up in nature. I didn't want that life anymore where I had to drive to a park just to see a tree, right? That started changing in me because I realized that nature should not be a luxury. It should not be something that I do once in a while. I should have it all around me because I see nature as a way to connect spiritually to my higher self, to God. Nature is God, right? It's an expression of energy at its most basic in its most basic form. And when we are so detached from that, this is when we get children who have a high rate of anxiety, adults who are constantly depressed. You may even go through more severe dark nights of the soul, or go through a dark night of the soul more often, more than one, many times, because you are detached from the thing that is our mother, the earth. And I knew deep down inside that that was important for me, and that I didn't want my children to go through that, because I grew up that way in the city, right? Where, it's rare to see a tree sometimes. You have more buildings than trees. So it feels isolating when other people don't realize that, when other people don't share that point of view. And it can be a very lonely place to be. But that's okay, because you do get past it, as I'll point out in some of our tips later on. The other thing is your interests start to change. So the TV shows that you used to watch, the parties you used to go to, the alcohol you used to drink every weekend, right? That starts to change because you start to realize that you were just operating in such an autopilot kind of way, that you were so busy, that you were in this hamster wheel. And then when you finally had time for yourself, it was to distract yourself from being with yourself. So you watched TV, you went to a party, you drank. Like, these are all distractions, right? Or what I like to call manufactured fun. You go to the movies, you go to fairs where you eat a bunch of junk food, and you go even a museum sometimes, right? Like, to me, I was like, I just want to be outside. Museums are great, but it was also a reminder of the matrix of that culture, right? That we're conditioned to follow. So maybe that's a weird one about me, but my interests became more simple, which made my life more complicated. It's a little bit ironic because nobody wants to follow me to the park. Who's with me? Let's go to the park, right? Not the most exciting thing in our society that, caters to the constant distraction and the constant excitement. Another thing that you might experience with the dark night of the soul is a change in your beliefs, and we've touched on this already in some parts of this video. But your old programs are falling apart. Programs of polarization and duality, that's a big one. Us versus them, it's huge. We grow up with this. Sports teams, news reports. Oh, that one did this to that one. And politics, this party versus that party. It's just this whole belief system that is attached to duality and polarization. And what it does is it negates love, because we're constantly struggling with the other, right? We're constantly struggling against something and we never feel like we win. So the game is rigged. And you are inside, your inner world will match your outer world. As above, so below, as within, so without. Correct? So if you are living this world of polarization and duality, then you are living an internal war as well. And if you start to notice your thought patterns when you are in that dualistic mentality, you will see that your thought patterns will match that within you as well. You will constantly be fighting yourself and criticizing yourself and doing a lot of negative self-talk. And it's just not a sustainable way of being. So this is where the ego comes in once again. The ego is dying. At this point, it realizes that, and there is a defense mechanism. It puts up a fight as well. There's that struggle again, because you have that in you already, but it's starting to drop off. But the ego is not going to go down without a fight. And the ego is our friend, but it has to be, we'll always have an ego. But this aspect of the ego is dying, only to be reborn in a better way, in a more evolved way. So I don't want us to think as the ego as this complete enemy, because it serves a purpose. But there's a point during this dark night of the soul where we start to rage against society and question the status quo and resent those asleep. Why am I the only one who notices this? Why are you guys just going along with what's happening? These are the old patterns and the old programs, and the ego is putting up a fight. So instead of going inward, the ego decides to make you fight with everyone. You know, it points the finger at the other, it externalizes. But when you realize that that's what the ego is doing, this is when you surrender. Because when you surrender, then you can look inward. You can stop fighting. Don't fight anymore. I'm going to give you a tip on how to avoid this level of struggle or navigating the dark night of the soul. What are these tips? What can you do to overcome this painful and uncomfortable moment? You give yourself first and foremost permission to feel your feelings. And I like to do this through affirmations. With an affirmation, you're creating the space, the safe space for yourself to validate your feelings. And letting yourself know that it's okay to feel that way and that it will pass. So I like to say something like, I feel sad today, and that's okay. That's it. It's very simple, but just saying that feeling out loud, recognizing it for what it is, and then telling yourself that it's okay. Because usually what we do is the opposite, right? We go to negative self-talk and we criticize ourselves, or we just full on ignore what we're feeling. So to say an affirmation will be the opposite of this. And even if you don't believe it in the moment, I can tell you from experience and from clients that this does work. It works because your conscious mind doesn't believe it. Your subconscious mind will at first. Your higher self will believe it. And then the conscious mind will catch up to it, because everything that we do and everything that we accomplish is manifested by first being energetically present and then coming into the physical. And that is why I see that affirmations really do work. The next tip I want to offer you is to align your inner world with your outer world. What do I mean by this? You are literally being purified and cleansed during the dark night of the soul. You are dropping old patterns, old ways of being that no longer serve you. So if you are being cleansed at the internal level, spiritually, emotionally, then do this externally as well. And what do I mean by cleansing externally? I don't mean go scrub yourself with soap, no, but a salt bath, Epsom salt bath, things that really rejuvenate you and help you get into a more positive state. Sleeping more if you're deprived of sleep. Take a nap. That's wonderful and really helps the body come back into balance. Meditation, Walking in nature, the colors of nature literally will relax you within seconds. Just seeing greenery, it has been scientifically proven to relax you. Clearing the clutter in your home. You hear a lot and read a lot about feng shui, right? The energy in your home is very important. And if your home is all cluttered, it also reflects what you're carrying inside. Have you released old feelings and emotions, or are things still trapped in you? And even if you haven't done the internal work yet, if you start cleaning out whatever clutter you have around you, it will eventually catch up to you inwardly as well. And it works both ways. Spending time in the sun. We all hear that the sun cleanses, the sun purifies, the sun disinfects and whitens clothes, right? Well, it does the same for our soul. So you are doing more than just getting vitamin D, which is also very important, of course. But spending time in the sun will instantly make you feel happier and elevate your mood, just because of the nature of what the sun is. It's not just plants that benefit from sun. It's us humans too. Every living thing. We would not be here if it were not for the sun. Yet we spend so much time indoors and we resist being out in the sun. And when we do, we lather ourselves up with sunblock or long sleeves or sunglasses. Very few of us actually receive sunlight directly upon us because we live in fear of what the sun can do for us. But it is a very powerful way to instantly elevate your mood, and it is also very tied into the walking in nature. So spending time out in nature will kill two birds with one stone in that sense. Another thing under the same, aligning your inner world with your outer world is, take it easy on yourself. Skip strenuous workouts or situations that might be too stressful for you. Even in yoga, right? They tell you self-love is very important. Self-compassion. So, doing a headstand is not the most important thing. It's understanding and making that space for yourself that, hey, maybe I couldn't stretch all the way down this time. Maybe I couldn't do that down dog without bending my knees a little. It's okay. The true meaning of yoga is to come home to yourself. It's union, aligning with your soul. And that means self-compassion and self-love. That is true yoga. If you did the headstand, but you were only thinking of competition or being better than the next person or, looking cool, then it wasn't yoga. So it's a spiritual practice to connect your inner world with your outer self. So if you can recognize that your body needs some compassion, then get off the treadmill. Don't go into stressful situations with lots of people if it's going to be overwhelming for you. Find peace, meditation, and rejuvenation. So the third tip I want to offer you on overcoming the dark night of the soul is to simply call in your spirit guides, even if you do feel alone. This is often when you need them the most, and they are just standing by waiting. Your angels, spirit guides, God, whoever you connect with spiritually, they are just waiting for you to ask. And here's the thing, spiritual awakenings often teach us lessons and then they test us along the way. And the dark night of the soul is no different from this. It is another lesson for us. And the test is, how do you respond when you are in crisis? Are you still responding from an egoic point of view? Are you still responding from just a physical perspective? Because you physically don't see a person near you and you feel alone? Or can you recognize that there is more beyond the physical, that you have a spiritual team there present for you? Okay? Do you forget about this spiritual reality? Ask yourself that question. Do you forget about the spiritual team that surrounds you, your guides, angels, your higher self, that are always there, just waiting for you to ask for guidance? Are you at the point where you understand that all you have to do is ask? Or do you still need, to go through more lessons in order to learn this? And it's not about punishment. It's just you either learn the lesson or you need more time to learn it. It's not about punishment. It's just either you have acquired the knowledge or you haven't. And then you just need more time. And usually we learn through crisis. Nobody ever learned too much just by sitting around and, not experiencing any hardship. But hardship gets easier along the way as we learn to cope with our skills. So when you hit the next dark night of the soul, and it will happen because we are all just developing and learning lessons every day, it will be easier. If you can recognize that help is just waiting there for you to ask, then you've learned the lesson, and this whole process will be a lot easier for you. Okay, and here's a little affirmation that I like to say when I feel alone. And once again, even though I don't consciously believe it because my physical brain is in chaos at that moment, or my emotions are getting the best of me. But if I say something like, my spirit guides are watching over me. I am safe. I am protected. I am supported, right? I am loved unconditionally. All these things, even right now as I say them, and I'm not, going through a crisis right now, but it just brings so much peace to me. And if you simply breathe in and out a few times before you say this, just center yourself and place your hands over your heart chakra, over your heart, it really will connect you to your higher self and to your emotions, and it will lift the weight off of you. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4 is an easy one, but as everything, right? Easier said than done. Have compassion. But I'm not just talking about having compassion for yourself, which is very important since the self gets overlooked often, but also for what, you would call in the Bible, right? We hear, love thy enemy. Those who are asleep, those who you deem to be asleep, you've woken up, you've gone through the spiritual awakening, and you're breaking out of this matrix. And it's natural to resent those who are still following those same patterns, and you become defensive and say, why are you still acting that way? Why can't you see the truth if I see the truth? But it takes a lot of humility, and humility is yet another lesson of the spiritual awakening, because we are not meant to awaken and then feel superior. We are meant to awaken, process, and integrate. And to truly integrate our lessons is to be humble about what we have learned, and then to try to help others awaken on their path as well, because we were once them. And if you can find yourself in others, you will find it much easier to have compassion for them, because everything that we criticize and that we judge tends to be something that we once were, because your inner world usually will match your outer world, and that which triggers you is usually something that you yourself were, that you resented in yourself. More often than not, that is the case. So the more the soul evolves, the closer it gets to being more like God, more like the angels, more like light and love, because that is really what Source and God are. And this dark night of the soul, along with the spiritual awakening, it's meant to push you to evolve more into love. It's not meant to hurt you. But if we are stuck in resentment, then we are moving away from love. But love in all its forms, such as compassion, forgiveness, humility, non-duality, right? Those are the things that are calling out to us when we go through this dark night of the soul. So, because that's what's going to get you out of the negative thinking. If you stay and follow the ego, the old ego, into resentment and pointing the finger and thinking that the external world is what caused you to feel this way, then you're going to stay there longer. The lesson will be longer until you pass the test. And it's not, once again, it's not a punishment. It's just either you passed or you didn't. And it reminds me of taking a chemistry class once, and it was around the time where a lot of these lessons were on the computer, and I had to do some homework and balance some chemical equations, and I kept getting it wrong. And the more you got it wrong, the program would give you a new problem to solve. And that's kind of like what this is. If you think about spiritual awakenings and the soul as a computer, this is kind of how it works. If you haven't learned the lesson, you have to keep learning it, keep at it until you can pass, until you can take the test and pass it. You'll get more tests, more problems to solve, and there you go. So it is that moment, the dark night of the soul, where we shed everything that does not align with the frequency of higher love. So if you're not aligning with that, then you're not evolving. And the answer is always love. That's something that my guides have reiterated to me many times. The answer is always love. And my fifth tip to you to close this off is journaling. Journaling, writing down your thoughts, your feelings, the dreams that you have at night, because these are very symbolic and contain messages for you on how to pass this quote-unquote test, right? When I do intuitive readings and energy healing sessions for clients, I would say 99% of the time, these clients do not have a practice of journaling or anything that's similar to that, right? Many of us, maybe as kids, I know little girls often had diaries when I was growing up, but it seems that we grow up and we don't journal anymore. I keep a dream journal now, and I also journal my thoughts and feelings within that same journal. And I think it's very useful because we are in this very busy lifestyle where we tend to ignore our feelings. And unless we sit down to study ourselves, we don't really know where we're going. We don't really know what we're doing. We don't really know what's happening. We're just in this dazed and confused state. And the dark night of the soul is a mechanism to stop you and to get you to pay attention. So when we talk about yoga, for example, when I did my yoga teacher training, there is the concept of svadhyaya, which is the study and knowledge and the discovery of the self. And the self is considered the spirit within you that underlies the ego and the intellect, right? And the mind. The spirit within you. You're studying that. Most of us go to college and learn all these things, and this is huge to me. This was huge when I first learned it, and it's still so important to me because the most important thing you'll ever learn in your life is yourself. And if you haven't learned about yourself, then you don't know where you're going or what you're meant to do. The soul is more important than any master's or PhD, in my opinion. And as a society, we often distract ourselves from getting to know our soul, right? Weekends are filled. If you work full time, you spend time with yourself, with your soul on the weekends, maybe. But most of us either, drink alcohol or binge watch screens or any other addictions that we might have. So a true act of self-love is to sit down and journal and write about yourself, because you are the most important person in your world. And if your inner world is going to match your outer world, then ask yourself, what is it that you do on your free time? Are you getting to know yourself? In my own journaling practice, I often write my dreams down, and that helps me to notice repeated symbols and communication from my spirit guides. And over the years, I've gone back to read these dreams, and I really do see that for years they were giving me the same messages, and I just was not getting it, right? And then as you journal, you'll also start to notice signs and synchronicities, right? More symbolism. In your waking life, you get signs and synchronicities either through numerology and ringing in your ears at 3:33. There's a big synchronicity that I've gotten. You'll also notice patterns in your life, loops that you continue to replay. the same fights that you keep having with the same family member. So that's why it's very important to journal, because it puts everything into perspective. You can get that bird's eye view of what's going on. So these were my 5 tips on how to get through that dark night of the soul. I really hope this helped, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.